between Moldova and Romania, there is a 15 years gap. And during my last 4 years living in Moldova, many times I had moments of deja vu saying, oh, it seems that I know what might happen in future because I live it in my own country 10 or 15 years ago. But this year is the year when they officially apply for European accession. People are speaking so much right now about European Union. So that's why I would say that Moldova should follow the same path like other Eastern European countries followed, not only Romania, but Poland, Czech Republic, Slovenia or Slovakia.
Welcome to How to Lend Money to Strangers with Brendan Lagrange. I've worked in consumer lending strategy for a little over 20 years, taking on roles across the credit lifecycle in Africa, Asia, and Europe. In that time, I've had the pleasure and sometimes just the experience of working with many different people. So I'm pretty confident when I say that Roman Zilbering is one of the true characters of credit risk strategy, just as comfortable solving errors in complex SAS code as he is propping up the bar. Any bar, but in particular, I remember one with peanut shells on the floor and turtles in little perspex cages that used its position as the only bar within walking distance of our office in Kowloon to charge almost unacceptable rates for a pint. In fact, Roman made such an impression on me in the 2 years we worked together that I turned him into a character in my first novel, Draken. You can download it for free now as an ebook, or buy it in any other format if you prefer. In Draken, I cast Roman as a Russian mercenary of sorts, because he speaks Russian. And although I knew he was born in Moldova, that's all I knew about Moldova. And in my little brain, it was enough to think that because Roman speaks Russian and Roman is from Moldova, Moldova must be kinda Russia. I grew up in the 80s in South Africa and they didn't teach us about the USSR with a lot of nuance, so perhaps you'll forgive me for my ignorance. Because it turns out I was completely wrong. I still love Roman, but Moldova's historical links are strongest to its western neighbour, Romania. So in this episode of How to Lend Money to Strangers, we take a closer look at that bond, a closer look at the Moldovan banking landscape, and we hear how one pioneering bank is closing the gap in terms of digital borrowing and banking experiences. Well, Bogdan, thank you so much for making the time. You're currently CEO at Victoriabank in Moldova, which is a country I know very little about. Although, when I was looking at the stats, I actually have quite a lot of listeners in Romania. So a good portion of them will know a lot more than I do. Before we get into that, let's quickly have a look at your background, because that's a long career working in banking in Romania and now in Moldova. So would you mind just starting us off with a bit of context and how you got to where you are today?
Okay, thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you very much for all this setup and invitation. My name is Bogan Plesuvescu. I'm a father of 2 children, professional sailor and banker. My first job in banking was 19 years ago, and I started working in legal field, becoming first head of legal and then chief legal officer in various banks in Romania. Looking back, ABN AMRO was the employer who mostly influenced my future career. I always remember with great joy their school of business, their human approach, work-life balance. Even now we have regular meetings among us, despite of the fact that we are working in different organizations at this point of time. But during that period I worked in ABN AMRO, I understood that my career in banking must be diversified. And I was almost convinced that I will not do only legal in my future careers in banking, but I should start understanding better the business and the banking in the most complex way. So little by little, I add business component on my legal background, and I start doing this when I joined Banca Transilvania as a chief workout officer in 2013, in charge with collection and turnaround procedures for clients who were in distress at that moment of time. Due to also the development of Banca Transilvania, I was attracted by merger and acquisition transactions, and I participate in a very, let's say, small team of negotiating the biggest M&A transactions in banking in Romania. Because in the last 6 years, the Banca Transilvania was involved in many M&A transactions. This started with acquisitions of Volksbank and then acquisitions of Bank Post, a member of the EFG Group. Based on this, in 2018, I accepted the challenge to become the Chief Executive Officer of Victoriabank, a newly acquired subsidiary of Banca Transilvania in Moldova. So from the very first moment when Banca Transilvania became the major shareholder together with the ABRD in Victoriabank, I started to work as a Chief Executive Officer there. And since then, I exercised my mandate of a complex turnaround of this bank in a modern and a very digital bank, I can say.
Before we go too deep into the work you're doing at Victoriabank now, 19 years ago that you started working in banking in Romania, it's been an interesting 19 years in terms of obviously what's happening in broader banking and fintech and the move to digital, but in terms of Romania's history too. And what are some of those big things that you've noticed in that time?
Yeah, so looking back in my career, I can say that at the beginning in Romania, there were many banks and mostly local-owned banks who previously were state-owned banks, and then they were privatized, or after the communism in Romania, there were some shareholders from Turkey or Greece, typically the shareholders looking for emerging markets and looking for high returns. This was in early 19s, I would say. After Romania started the road of European Union accession, international investors started to look more actively in Romania, and especially in banking sector. And so little by little, banks like ABN AMRO, UniCredit, Raiffeisen invested in Romania, and they gradually became the largest banks in Romania, with international shareholders bringing their know-how, bringing their colleagues, and teaching us how to do banking, real banking, not the local banking we were used to previously. I was fortunate that initially I worked for a bank with Turkish shareholders, where I learned very much negotiation skills, because as you may know, Turkish citizens are very good in negotiations. Having this part together with ABN AMRO, it helped me a lot in my career. Then in 2006, 2008, the crisis came and it was all over the world. The banking system in Romania was affected as well. However, I can say that Romania was lucky enough because the banks at that moment of time were very well capitalized and with a good liquidity. We had, and still we have, a very tough regulators. And even before the crisis, National Bank of Romania refused to ease the regulation in Romania and capital allocation or minimum reserves for the bank, insisting in preparing the banking systems for eventual crisis. That's why it was not like it was in other countries. However, we had several banks exposed, especially the banks who either didn't have at that moment the support of a strong shareholder, or the banks who invested a lot in mortgage loan in not in local currencies. Then soon after the crisis, they were forced to divest their business.
And then you moved to take this role in the newly acquired Victoriabank in Moldova. And when I saw that initially, it was interesting to me. And this is showing more my ignorance than anything else. I'll blame it on South African government school education. But the only person I know from Moldova, his family left during the Soviet Union days, and the fact that he spoke Russian, I'd seen Moldova as more related to Russia. But actually, as soon as I looked, I saw, the talks about even potentially re-emerging Moldova with Romania. It's the national language. There's huge connections to Romania. So perhaps for other people listening who are also ignorant like I was, what are the links between Moldova and Romania, and how connected are those two cultures, those two business landscapes?
There were periods when they were more oriented to the east, closer to Russia, or they are more closer to the west. Yeah, I will not enter into too much politics in here. I will stay only. Romania and Moldova are speaking the same language. They share the same culture. After the Second World War, Europe was divided west and east, and in the east, including Romania, the influence of Soviet Union was very high. We are fortunate in Romania fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate that we are allowed to speak our own language. We are not deported to Siberia, and Russians are not replacing the local population. We are not fortunate because we had 45 years of communism when our liberty was more than a little bit affected. But coming back to Moldova, they were not so lucky like Romanians, and until 1991, Moldova was part of Soviet Union. But in 1991, Moldova regained his independence, and ever since, Moldova is struggling to find its identity, its path, and as you mentioned, it is this discussion about European Union accession. But people are speaking so much right now about European Union, and not only because it's something they dream about, but most of the population is 2.5 million official population, but most of the youngest people in Moldova are already working in European Union. They already know how the European is looking.
And the banking landscape, what did you find when you landed in Moldova? Was it in a similar position to the Romanian banking landscape, or were there different things that needed to be done to get the business up to the level you like to have it at?
So when I landed, that I officially moved in Moldova, after a few months, I would rather say that between Moldova and Romania, there is a 15 years gap. And during my last 4 years living in Moldova, many times I had moments of deja vu, saying, oh, it seems that I already lived this several years ago, so I know what might happen in future because I live it in my own country 10 or 15 years ago. So this might be an opportunity for the bank because I understand the changes will occur in Moldova in the next period of time. So Moldova should follow the same trend, the same path like other Eastern European countries followed, not only Romania, but like Poland, like Czech Republic, like Slovenia or Slovakia followed.
Yeah, when I was doing my MBA, we were always looking at Estonia as an example, the benefits of being a small country in a digitizing world. As the world becomes more digital, it gives a chance to accelerate and catch up some of those gaps that exist, maybe even leapfrog some of the old technology. When I was looking at Victoriabank, lots of talk about innovation and going digital. How do you see yourselves as a sort of a banking brand in the Moldovan landscape?
So we can speak about Victoriabank, but first of all, it's important to understand the level of the banking system and the scale in Moldova, because as I mentioned, it's a small country, square meters, and also like a population. The GDP it's around 11.5 billion euro. GDP per capita is 4,400 euro. Average salary it's about 450 euro per month, with unemployment rate of 3.5% and inflation rate, the official inflation rate at this moment of time, it's around 22%. And to understand the banking system, it's 51% of the total GDP in Moldova. To understand the scale, only in Victoriabank in Romania, which is the biggest bank in Romania, is bigger than the total banks in Moldova. But the competition is very tight, and this affects the margins very, very dramatically. There are 11 banks, too many for this population. Now coming back to Victoriabank, 2018, Victoriabank was the third largest bank in Moldova. We are, let's say, always proud of our history and about innovation which were brought in Moldova by Victoriabank since the moment it was established as a bank. Actually, Victoriabank was the first private-owned bank in Moldova and was set up in 1989, the same period of time when Romania became free of communism. Then There were some novelties during the period of existence because Victoriabank in 1997, they were first bringing a credit card issued in Moldova. Then the next year in 1998, it was the first ATM. And then coming to, let's say, latest history in 2017, we were launching the first wallet NFC solution for Android customers in Moldova, which was VB24 Pay. During my mandate, let's say, other novelties were released in Moldova, and in 2019, we are the first bringing wearable payments in Moldova. Once we launch Garmin Pay, then the first tap to phone solution, and now you can do payment directly on your mobile phone. And last but not least, together with other two banks, we launch Apple Pay solution for Moldova. So it has in the blood of this bank, it's to bring novelties. And despite of the fact that maybe it's not the biggest bank or not the most profitable bank, it's always looking for innovative solutions.
It certainly sounds like that, closing that 10, 15-year gap very quickly. From a lending point of view, when you're making your lending decisions for those credit cards, for those loans, what is the data environment like there? Is there a credit bureau? Do you have alternative data? What does that look like?
Yes, there are not only one credit bureau, there are 3 or 4, which makes our life complicated because of the cost of interrogation. So many databases are very high. In Romania, for example, there is only one, but in Moldova, this is what we have, so we have to manage. But speaking about digital lending, we've done serious steps, critical steps, I would say, for preparing for this digital lending, and maybe this year or next year it will become a very common topic in Moldova and also in Victoriabank as well. So first of all, there was this loan origination software which we implemented quite successfully 2 years ago, and mainly our consumer lending, it's now fully centralized and fully locked in this loan origination software. This year, we will be able to extend this also to the small enterprises lending. And it's important because we can implement automatical score. And so there are many files right now which they never reach to any people. It's automatically scored and automatically the decision comes from this software. If it is yellow, there are several people looking into the files, or if it is red, it's automatically knocked out from the decision. But this is only the beginning, and once the legislation will allow the banks to extensively recognize people based on videos or based on not on, let's say, face-to-face discussions, I'm sure that we'll be able to speak more about digital lending.
You're listening to How to Lend Money to Strangers. If you're enjoying it, please hit the little plus button to subscribe and share it with your connections on LinkedIn. Now, let's get back to the show.
At this moment of time, we are able to do digital lending, and we are doing only for the people who are already customers of our bank, because we already have our newer customer done into our bank, and also they have electronic signature available. They do not have to come to the bank to sign. So they applied on our website, they signed with electronic digital, and the money are on their account. I'm sure that by the end of this year or maybe next year, with modern tools, this digital lending will increase. Firstly for individuals and then for the small entrepreneurs.
Yeah, the identity verification is usually the hardest one to get through there. Bogdan, in terms of the big subject of the day, hopefully we're moving out of COVID now, but obviously around the world we've had a couple of years of unsettled markets, of unexpected risks. How did the Moldovan market get through that? Was there a lot of change in risk, or is it one of the markets where things were generally fairly stable?
Actually, no, it was, let's say, very affected. There are some legacy issues, a lot of scandals, and the biggest one is 1 billion stolen from the state. But Victoriabank, for example, when I joined the bank in 2018, the non-performing loan portfolio was about 30%. 30%, it's huge for any bank. So our main focus during that period before the COVID, and it's helping us now very much. So our main focus in 2018, 2019 was to recover the huge non-performing loans and replace it with quality loans. So we managed during this period of time to reassess our portfolio, and 2018, 80% of the loans were large corporate exposures and 15% individuals, 5% SMEs. Now, in our portfolio, we have 65 individuals, 15% small enterprises, and only 20% large corporate. So the COVID, it was in a moment when this portfolio was already, let's say, very stable, and we're not very much impacted. Of course, March, April, and even June were quite a lot affected. But then, little by little, started to recover. Of course, there were some concerns, and the recent developments in the borders of Moldova, I think, that are threatening more than COVID crisis. I think that this is the main factor which might affect not only the economy but also all the industries in Moldova. We have seen a lot of people becoming scared in 24th of February when the war started, and as it happened also in Romania, people ran to transfer their local currency deposits into euro or USD, and even taking the money out of the banks. Luckily, the banking systems was very solid. All the banks were able to cope with this new type of threats. And this period of time took only 2 or 3 weeks. And after that, population started to chill, to calm down, and to realize that the banks are working. So they started again to build up their deposits. But on the economy side, there will be some complications and more threats. The gas price will increase. So all this, it will go through to the chain of productions. Most of the products and basic products, it will be affected. But I'm sure that this war, it will not last forever. It will come to an end. And at this moment of time, the so-called Marshall Plan of European Union to help Ukraine to reborn, also it will be like opportunity for Moldova to participate into this effort, and many people will start understanding and to learn about Moldova, not like you said in the beginning, like Soviet Union countries. Many people will remember Moldova as being the country who helped a lot Ukrainians during their moment when they left the countries, and I do not want anybody to leave their homes, their countries, and to come in a stranger, but still to see a lot of empathy and a lot of optimism and a lot of help.
No doubt difficult times for the short term, but hopefully, a future that's bright and full of growth opportunities for Moldova and indeed for the whole region. So, Bogdan, thank you so much for joining me today. And it's been a pleasure chatting to you and learning more about Victoriabank and Moldova. So I look forward to keeping an eye on the innovations you bring to the market and indeed hope for a brighter future for the country.
Thank you again for inviting me, and looking forward to hear news from you as well.
And thank you all for listening. If you haven't done so already, like, share, and subscribe to the show. How to Lend Money to Strangers is written, hosted, and edited by myself, Brendan LaGrange. The theme tune and show music is by I Am Wake. And you can find show notes, written transcripts, more in-depth articles, and details on how to book me for speaking engagements at www.howtolendmoneytostrangers.show. I'll see you again next Thursday.